At the time of this video, Stephen King has sold 350 million books, written 77 novels, 200 short stories, 21 screenplays. His film adaptations have generated over $2 billion in box office revenue. On average, he releases a new publication every 20 weeks, and he's worth $500 million. So, can someone that successful be considered a true artist, or is Stephen King, as he himself puts it, the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries? In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the most prolific and arguably profound writers of the last 100 years and put to rest the question, is Stephen King a hack or literary genius? Full disclosure, I'm a massive King fan, and making this video is part tribute and part exercise in objectivity. I'll try. I know what a lot of readers think about the author, but I also know that a lot of people judge his work based on the opinions of others before ever having read a word. And some opinions on his writing are based completely off the film adaptations of his books.
Here's Johnny!
So how is that fair? It's not. Let's get into it. In 1947, Stephen Edwin King was born in Portland, Maine. The same Maine which would become a thread running through most of his books and the setting for some of his most well-known novels. When King was 2, his father left for a pack of cigarettes and never came back, leaving mother Nellie alone to raise him and his brother David. She struggled financially and moved the family around a lot, leaning on the kindness of relatives to make ends meet. Even though Nellie encouraged Stephen to read and took him to libraries to explore different genres of literature, she battled with alcoholism, which had a profound impact on Stephen and his family. Her struggles with addiction and other hardships would later influence some of the themes and characters in King's novels, most notably in works like The Shining and Cujo. Despite her difficulties, Nellie remained a supportive presence in Stephen's life. He has spoken fondly of her, crediting her with nurturing his creativity and imagination. After achieving success as a writer, King provided financial support to his mom and ensured she received the care she needed.
My mother gave me room to be what I wanted to be. The paperback advance just bowled us over. It was like $400,000 in 1974. It was a huge amount of money. She was in excruciating pain by that point. And my brother and I, we said, "Mom, you're done. There's enough to take care of you now," because the book sold for a lot of money and you can go home. And she just put her hands over her face and cried.
And although she didn't live to see the full extent of her son's success, her influence on his life and writing remains palpable in the themes of family that permeate his work. He began writing at a young age, around 6 or 7, by copying panels from comic books and crafting his own stories. His early love for film also influenced his writing style. A pivotal moment came when he discovered a box of his father's books in the attic, including an H.P. Lovecraft collection entitled The Lurking Fear and Other Stories. He stated, "I think it is beyond doubt that H.P. Lovecraft has yet to be surpassed as the 20th century's greatest practitioner of the classic horror tale. Lovecraft opened the way for me, as he had done for others before. It is his shadow so long and gaunt and his eyes so dark and puritanical, which overlie almost all of the important horror fiction that has come since." He became an avid reader, devouring everything from Nancy Drew to Edgar Allan Poe. One particularly influential book was William Golding's Lord of the Flies. It follows a group of boys stranded on a desert island as they struggle for power and survival, banding together to defeat an unseen monster lurking on the island. It would set the template for one of King's best-selling books, It. Both novels explore the transition from childhood to adulthood and the loss of innocence. Characters in It, like Ben and Eddie, share traits with the troubled boys in Lord of the Flies, such as Piggy. Ben's bullying and Eddie's asthma echo Piggy's experience and vulnerabilities.
Facts. Leave him alone. Shut up, you creep.
Oh no. It's empty.
Piggy's fixed. Trouble.
However, the most significant connection lies in the presence of a different kind of monster: adults. In It, King asserts that grown-ups are the real monsters, portraying instances of indifference, cruelty, and abuse. Both novels confront the idea that true horrors stem from within society itself, rather than external monsters like Pennywise the clown or the imagined beast on the island. More on it later. While attending Lisbon High School, King contributed to the school newspaper and sold stories to friends. His first independently published story, I Was a Teenage Grave Robber, appeared in a fanzine called Comics Review in 1965. In 1966, King enrolled at the University of Maine on a scholarship, where he wrote for the student paper and found mentors in Professor Edward Holmes and Burton Hatlin. It was at the university where he met his future wife, Tabitha Spruce, to whom he's still married to this day. The following year, he sold his first short story, The Glass Floor, to Startling Mystery Stories for $35, around $300 today. The story was described by critics as derivative and a clumsy combination of Poe and Lovecraft. Even King said as much upon revisiting it decades later, but nonetheless, he was now a published professional writer. In 1970, he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English, and he and Tabitha married the following year. After graduation, he looked for teaching positions as an English teacher and found a job at Hampton Academy in Maine. Meanwhile, he sold short stories to publications such as Cavalier, a number of which resurfaced in his 1978 short story collection, Night Shift. It was during this time that King would begin writing his first bestseller, a book that would change his life and arguably the world of writing forevermore. Carrie, released in 1974, tells the story of Carrie White, a shy, introverted high schooler who discovers she has telekinetic powers. The novel explores themes of bullying, religion, and parental abuse. The protagonist is raised by her overly religious mother, Margaret White, who instills in her a deep fear of sin and damnation. At school, Carrie is mercilessly bullied by her peers. She begins to develop her telekinetic abilities, which she initially struggles to control. The plot escalates when she experiences her first period while in the school showers. Her classmates cruelly taunt her, throwing tampons and sanitary napkins at her. This traumatic event triggers Carrie's telekinetic powers, leading to a series of devastating consequences. Throughout the novel, Carrie's powers eventually reach a violent crescendo, resulting in a catastrophic and bloody climax. Carrie was published in 1974 to modest success initially, but gained widespread acclaim after the release of the film adaptation in 1976. It became a New York Times bestseller, remaining on the list for 14 weeks. After the film's debut, the totaling book sales reached 4 million.
I'm particularly proud of my first book, Carrie, be available at stores everywhere thanks to you.
The novel's success launched his career as a prolific and influential writer in the horror genre, earning him the title Master of the Macabre, a bittersweet phrase that would follow him his entire career and perhaps harm his prospects in the realm of high literature. The following year, he released Salem's Lot, a story set in the small town of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine, which becomes plagued by vampires. Today, it's regarded as one of King's early masterpieces and a classic of the vampire genre. It became a bestseller and was nominated for multiple writing awards. Critics had this to say: King single-handedly made popular fiction grow up. While there were many good best-selling writers before him, King, more than anybody, brought reality to genre novels. The rich characterization, the careful and caring social eye, the interplay of storyline and character development announced that writers could take worn themes such as vampires and make them fresh again. The book was adapted into a 2-part miniseries, of course, and this will become a running theme throughout King's career. It was perhaps his next novel, which came out in 1977, that confirmed what many were saying. Stephen King is a master writer and a once-in-a-lifetime figure. Upon its release, The Shining began making waves everywhere.
What's so great about The Shining?
The question should be, Rach, what is not so great about The Shining? Okay? And the answer would be nothing. All right? This is like the scariest book ever.
The previous year, the author visited the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. After writing 2 novels taking place in Maine, he wanted to change it up a bit. He and his wife Tabitha checked in on October 30th, and he recalls, "When we arrived, they were just getting ready to close for the season, and we found ourselves the only guests in the place, with all those long, empty corridors. That night, they had dinner alone. Except for our table, all the chairs were up, so the music is echoing down the hall, and I mean, it was like God had put me there to hear that and see those things. And by the time I went to bed that night, I had the whole book in my mind." The Shining deals with a lot of personal baggage, alcoholism, which King struggled with, isolation, and madness. Jack Torrance, the main character, finds himself going slowly insane at the Overlook Hotel, with his wife and son taking the brunt of his abuse.
The Shining was written at a time when I was discovering that fatherhood was a lot different than what I had thought it was gonna be. You walk into the kitchen and you see kid number 1 has been scribbling with crayons on the wall again, just as kid number 2 manages to spill his Dr. Pepper all over the manuscript that you're working on, and you're trying to deal with all these things, and this voice that comes from the alligator brain, the primitive brain at the back of your mind is saying, "Let's kill them all, okay? Let's just kill them all."
It's safe to say the novel is terrifying, absolutely chilling, and it does a fantastic job demonstrating just how talented Stephen King really is. Of course, it sold millions and millions of copies and was hailed by critics everywhere. Even Stanley Kubrick chose to adapt it into arguably King's best transfer to the screen, even though King wasn't a fan.
I really enjoyed The Shining. I think that was my favorite of all of your books. But I really hated the movie. And I was really wondering what your opinion of the movie was.
I felt a little bit as though I had given Stanley Kubrick a live hand grenade and he had heroically thrown his body on it. I think that it's a lovely movie to look at. It has those luscious, long tracking shots, and you get to follow the little kid along on his tricycle, and it's going along and going over the hardwood floors and then the rugs. But one of the things that I think is very, very necessary for any kind of a horror movie or a horror novel or a horror short story is that you have to feel something for the people involved. Because if you don't feel anything, then there isn't any horror. I don't think there's any horror without love. That's the dimension I thought was lacking. So I saw these all as warm characters that were being threatened by forces from without, from ghosts, from real supernatural creatures. And the film is extremely cold. I always thought that the real difference between my take on it and Stanley Kubrick's take on it was this. In my novel, the hotel burns. In Kubrick's movie, the hotel freezes.
And although the movie ending is different than the book, it remains one of the greatest horror films and novels ever made. By this point, King was on a roll with no signs of stopping, raking in the books, the acclaim, the fame, but what of his stature as an artist? Was this the equivalent of a musician making a few good albums and relegated to history as just another pop star, or was there genius at work? Shakespeare wrote 39 plays, around 150 sonnets, and several long poems. He was pumping them out hit after hit. His impact on literature and art in general is immeasurable. The same can be said of Stephen King. So why is it that he's looked upon as a hack? Shakespeare did face his share of critics in his time, but has since become perhaps the most important writer in the English language. Maybe King's fate is that of the bards. Maybe. Things were going well, very well for the young author. In fact, King thought that maybe it was just luck that accounted for his success. This self-doubt led him to do what many authors have done in the past, take on a pseudonym, a fake name and persona under which he could write whatever he pleased without the weight of his true self attached. From 77 to 85, he published 5 books under the Bachman name. He intentionally released the books with little to no marketing, and they did fine. Nothing close to his alter ego's success, but fine enough. In 1985, as King was enjoying the thrill of anonymity, his true identity was discovered by an eagle-eyed fan.
We tried everything that we could think of to keep the secret, including this jacket photo here. I don't know if you can see that.
It's a fake photograph.
Yes,
Bachman.
this Richard Bachman is a tire salesman. But there was a guy who worked for a bookstore in Washington, D.C., who read my books, who'd also read the Bachman books. He wrote me a letter and said, I've looked in the Library of Congress, and I noticed that the copyrights for the Bachman books are held in the name Stephen King. That was
the
it.
end.
The game was over, and so I simply owned up to it.
Of course, all the Bachman books became huge successes when people found out who the actual author was. It was during this time of experimentation that he released his longest book to date under his actual name. The Stand, released in 1978, was an 800-plus page post-apocalyptic tale of good versus evil.
I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I was driving on the Boulder-Denver cutoff, Route 36, and I was listening to a radio station in Arvada. It was one of these Bible shouters. I love those guys. And this guy was talking about some Old Testament book, and he's saying, once in every generation, the plague shall fall among them. And we were living near a chemical warfare dump in that area, and there was a lot of talk about it. And I thought, what if there was a plague and it killed just about everybody? And there were only a few people left. And I thought to myself, I'm going to write that. And that was just such a blast, and it turned into The Stand. That was good.
A modern classic and hailed by many as his finest, it again became a bestseller with 4.5 million copies sold. The Stand also introduced the character of Randall Flagg, a demonic sorcerer who wreaks havoc wherever he goes. He would appear again in 9 separate novels. This, along with the setting of Maine, is a staple in King's bibliography. Before there was an MCU, King was creating a rich universe of characters and story arcs that weaved in and out of one another, popping up everywhere, giving cohesion and a feeling of a grand design to all his books. Fun fact, Metallica's second album, Ride the Lightning, is named after a quote from The Stand, when a prison inmate is awaiting execution by electric chair. It reads, "Why, then you go on to death row at state prison and just enjoy all that good food until it's time to ride the lightning." Despite rave reviews, fantastic sales, and becoming a fan favorite, the keepers of high literature again had things to say. The late Harold Bloom, arguably the most famous literary critic, famously referred to King as an immensely inadequate writer on various levels of literary craftsmanship, another low in the shocking process of dumbing down our cultural life. Bloom's critique focused on King's prose style, suggesting that it lacked sophistication and depth found in more traditionally esteemed literature. King himself addressed this criticism in a 1993 interview with Charlie Rose, where he dismissed the notion that widespread popularity equates to low literary quality.
As I've gotten more successful in terms of copies sold, the critical reaction to my stuff has been stiffer, and that's the way that it should be. So that there's been some of that, but I also think that there's a critical view in this country that says we critics are the few, the proud, the brave. And there is a feeling among the real critical intelligentsia that anybody who's being read by a lot of people can't be very good, because the middle range is fairly low, and that's total bull.
The thing about King is he's not just a horror writer. He's a writer. His playground is vast, the genres wide. His works span from the macabre extending to epic fantasy, crime noir, and mystery. He's penned heartwarming stories like Stand By Me, The Green Mile, and perhaps his most famous, The Shawshank Redemption, a short story first appearing in the 1982 collection Different Seasons under the name Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. It was an unusual departure for the author at the time, choosing to write in the realism style, refraining from the supernatural elements altogether. It's a story of a man wrongfully accused of killing his wife and escaping prison. Simple, but what a punch it packs. It was, of course, famously adapted in 1995, starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. It was nominated for a Best Picture Oscar and Best Actor for Freeman.
There's this old lady, and she looked up and she said, "I know who you are. I recognize you. I've seen you on TV. You're Stephen King. You write those scary things." Well, that's all right for some people. Scary things are all right for some people, but I don't care for that sort of thing myself. I don't read it. I like uplifting things like that Shawshank Redemption. So I said, "I wrote that," and she said, "No, you didn't."
It's the perfect example of just how versatile a writer King is. Similarly with Stand By Me and The Green Mile, and even though the latter does contain a supernatural element, it's a story that shines a light on early 20th century America, highlighting themes of racism, classism, murder, illness, death, and immortality. I'm sorry, but no hack could possibly produce such uplifting work so far away from the horror genre that gave him fame. One of his most recent works, the Bill Hodges trilogy of books, include Mr. Mercedes, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch. They're a collection of hard-boiled detective stories, a genre begun in the 1920s. Michael Smith of The Guardian stated upon its release, is firmly positioned in suspense thriller territory and the non-supernatural world, somewhere King evidently feels increasingly at home. Mr. Mercedes won the 2015 Edgar Award, a prestigious and coveted prize named after Edgar Allan Poe. In the 1980s, King hit his stride, releasing hit after hit, culminating in some of his most loved work to this day. We're not going to go through all of them because that would take forever. Instead, I'll highlight the best, in my opinion. The Dead Zone, Firestarter, Cujo, Christine, Pet Sematary, and Misery. All fantastic, all very much King. But the two standout novels from this era that we must discuss, The Dark Tower and It. Talking about the Dark Tower series in itself is a daunting task that requires several videos to do it justice. But for the sake of this video, let's boil it down to its essence. A Tolkienian collection of 8 books and a novella that tells the story of the gunslinger, Roland, and his journey towards a physical and metaphorical tower. The books are written in the fantasy style with elements of horror, western, and science fiction thrown into the mix. The first book came out in 1982 and the last in 2012. The series begins with what I think is one of the all-time great book openers. The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. Spoiler alert, it closes with the same line. Just sitting here thinking of it gives me goosebumps. King even created his own language that different characters use throughout the books, a la Tolkien for his series, and the TV adaptation of George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones books. In fact, Martin is a huge Stephen King fan.
There is something I want to ask you. All right. How the f*** do you write so many books so fast?
The way that I work, I try to get out there and I try to get 6 pages a day. So with a book like End of Watch, if the manuscript is, let's say, 360 pages long, that's basically 2 months' work.
You don't ever have a day where you sit down there and it's like constipation and you write a sentence and you hate the sentence and
okay.
you check your email and you wonder if you had any talent after all and maybe you should have been a plumber. Don't you have
Marvel Comics even adapted the books across several issues. How were the Dark Tower books reviewed? Bill Sheehan of the Washington Post called them a humane, visionary epic and a true magnum opus that stands as an imposing example of pure storytelling. But of course, not everyone was happy, with some calling the series absurd and long-winded.
Any book that I published, you can find 5, 6, 7 reviews that say, this guy is a really terrible writer. He's a hack, he's this and that. But yeah, sophomore. You can find other critics for a lot of those books where they'll say this is a pretty good book. And my feeling is that always you balance the two things out and then you can reject the whole mess. The only time that you've got a problem is that everybody's saying the same thing.
Many called it his masterpiece, but many others called the next book his magnum opus instead. 1986's It. On the surface, King's 22nd novel, cracking just over 1,100 pages, deals with a monster that reemerges every 27 years to feed on the fears of children in the fictional town of Derry, Maine. But the story is actually about friendship and loyalty. The monster in question takes the form of a clown named Pennywise, something King himself has a phobia of. The kids in question are part of the Losers Club, a gang of overweight, glasses-wearing, stuttering, nerdy misfits who just don't fit in anywhere but amongst themselves. Like Lord of the Flies, which I touched on, the kids band together, finding comfort and protection in the face of an ancient evil. They form a pact, promising to regroup in 27 years should Pennywise return. The book is a powerful read, exploring themes of memory, trauma, sacrifice, and loss. Things King is always weaving into his work. It took 5 years to write, and one New York Times critic stated, "It concerns the evil that has haunted America from time to time in the forms of crime, racial and religious bigotry, economic hardship, labor strife, and industrial pollution." Another reads, "Pennywise isn't the novel's biggest terror. The most prominent notions of fear in the novel come from the Losers Club themselves, their home lives, the things that have made them pariahs." And that's the takeaway here. It's 1,000 pages of complex character building, literally from adolescence to adulthood. 7 main ones make up the Losers Club: Bill, Ben, Bev, Richie, Eddie, Mike, and Stan. It's not just about a killer clown who eats kids. And in fact, if you could replace the clown with any subject, it still works beautifully as far as literature is concerned. King masterfully draws on the topics of the time, painting a vivid picture of small-town America in the 50s and the contrasting big city life of the 80s. These images are still running through my head, in fact, more so than any image of Pennywise. When I think of it, I think of the Losers Club and how I identified with every one of those kids growing up. I think of the clown lastly. It's a true masterpiece. The book was so iconic that Pennywise became a pop culture icon. The novel was adapted into a miniseries in the 90s and remade into 2 films in 2017 and 2019. Both were hugely successful, reasserting the connection audiences make with the characters King wrote so beautifully.
My grandfather thinks this town is cursed. That all the bad things that happen in this town are because of one thing. An evil thing.
In 2016, Stranger Things debuted to rave reviews on Netflix. The similarities between the series and It are clear. In fact, several King Easter eggs are seen throughout the show. The Duffer Brothers, who wrote the show, made no secret of their obsession with Stephen King growing up.
Stephen King, I haven't met him in person, but he tweeted about our show and we've exchanged some emails with him, and that still blows my mind because growing up, he was such an inspiration. I mean, he's like a god to us, and so it's just been surreal communicating with him at all. It's been amazing.
The series also follows a group of 80s kids, much like the Losers Club, who band to battle an evil force. Oh, and the telekinetic character of Eleven is 100% a mix of Carrie and Charlie McGee from Firestarter. Even the show's logo shares a similar design to how King's name appears on his book covers. To go through what came next would be too great an undertaking, but let's just say this: he wrote dozens more books and short stories that could easily be considered classics. It's hard to think that one man can produce so much in a relatively short period. At 76 years old, he's still writing today. In fact, his routine includes penning 2,000 words a day. That's partly how he writes so much and so quickly. He's definitely not the norm, however. His love of reading is also what aids in his insane output. He says, if you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. In 2000, he released his second nonfiction work called On Writing, a memoir of the craft, a book that aims to give his readers or aspirational authors advice on writing itself.
One of the really bad things you can do to your writing is to dress up the vocabulary, looking for long words because you're maybe a little bit ashamed of your short ones. Make yourself a solemn promise right now that you'll never use emolument when you mean tip, and you'll never say John stopped long enough to perform an act of excretion when you mean John stopped long enough to take a shit.
Today he lives between Florida and Bangor, Maine, with his wife Tabitha, who's also an author. They have 3 kids, 2 of which are writers as well. His iconic home in Maine now serves as an archive of his works, with the house next door functioning as a retreat for writers.
If you've driven past Stephen King's house in Bangor lately, you may have noticed something interesting. A single red balloon is sitting in the front left window. Many believe it could have something to do with the premiere of the new movie It.
At the time of this video, the 76-year-old shows no signs of slowing down, releasing a new collection of 12 short stories called You Like It Darker. Oh, and he has an on-again, off-again charity band with fellow writers called the Rock Bottom Remainders. They have raised $2 million for charity, and Stephen plays the guitar. Stephen King, the name which has become synonymous with a good scare. Sadly, though, You say that name and people tend to react with, "Oh, I love that movie," or "I hated that film." In today's world of declining interest in reading, it's rare that you get the reaction of, "Oh, I loved that book," or "I hated that novel." Regardless of whether he is Nobel or Pulitzer Prize worthy, I think he is. Bob Dylan got a Nobel. One can't deny the profound impact he's had on pop culture, art, film, and of course, writing. He is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, walking the fine line between master of the macabre and literary genius. Today's equivalent of Mark Twain, he doesn't take himself seriously but has immense respect for the craft. On his critics, King has stated, "I'd like to win the National Book Award, the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize. I'd like to have someone write a New York Times book review piece that says, 'Hey, wait a minute, guys, we made a mistake. This guy is one of the great writers of the 20th century.' But that's not going to happen." So, while his books may not be considered high art, they are without a doubt works of literary genius for a modern era. One wouldn't be wrong comparing King to Orwell, Poe, Lovecraft, Dickens, Melville, or Golding. His works are modern-day classics that do more than just scare. Much like his predecessors' works, which are now considered classics, they tear apart the fabrics that make up society. They dissect the inner workings of families, friendships, and monsters. They teach us that beneath the clown makeup is something much more frightening: a human being.
That's it from here.